When you're teaching in a public school, there can be so many questions around what am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? Particularly when it comes to religion and religious topics in the public school. So I'm so excited to be talking today with Heather Conan about how to be a light for Christ in the public schools without breaking the law. Well, welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. Today, I'm so excited to be talking with Heather Conan, but first, let me thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you, first of all, in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. I also want to thank our sponsor, the American Association of Christian Schools. If you are looking for a teaching position, the American Association of Christian Schools Placement Service is a free service to connect you with Christian schools that are looking for teachers. The AACS represents 720 conservative Christian schools, primarily affiliated with fundamentalist Baptist and Bible churches. So this won't necessarily be the right fit for everyone, but if you're part of these circles, this could be just what you're looking for. So if that's you, visit aacs.org and click the big red placement service box on the home page. Well, Heather, we're so excited to talk to you about this topic today, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Absolutely. It's something I'm really passionate about. I'm excited to visit.
And Heather has so much experience with this and is also one of our part of our partner organization, Christian Educators, which is who we do the Rise Up Summit with each year. And you guys specialize. Maybe real quick before we dive into this, can you just tell us a little bit about how Christian Educators helps teachers in this way?
Yeah. We are a professional organization for Christians, predominantly in public education. And we support, connect, and protect them so that they can become thriving ambassadors for Christ in their schools. And so we offer all sorts of different ways to encourage and help them walk in confidence.
Yeah, and there's so many amazing things Christian Educators does. We'll probably talk about some of this here. One of the things they do is an awake conferences, and I was privileged to attend one with Heather and some of the other ladies. And on that, part of what they did was they went through some of what are teachers allowed to do in public schools, what are they not allowed to do, and I said this is so helpful, and we've got to talk about this on the podcast. So Heather, though, before we kind of dive into that, here's one thing I wanted to ask you about. Are there any mindsets or habits that you find helpful for Christian teachers to adopt when they think about, how do I live as a faithful follower of Christ while in the public schools?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is a great mindset is to recognize that you're an ambassador for Christ. Remember, ambassadors, when we think about them, typically they're sent into a foreign land and they're sent to represent their kingdom, right? And so when we are in the public education field, it is kind of like a foreign land. I would say a lot of people feel like it's more foreign than it has been. And so that you are there, you're representing a different culture, a different kingdom, and you want to navigate that way as you're going through your career.
Yeah, that is such a great way of thinking about it, right? We're representing Christ, we're his ambassadors, and he's put us right where he wants us. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't, but we can trust that we are where he has us this year for this time. So when I talk with teachers, particularly those that work in public schools, there's just a vast variety in teachers' understanding of what can I do, what can't I do in a public school. I think sometimes there's a misnomer that like the Bible or any religious thing is not allowed. Like that just has to be completely not touched at all in public schools. And I've learned, particularly from working with Christian educators, that is actually not the case. So as I said, I think it'd be really helpful to talk through what are some of the things actually as teachers we can legally do and we can't. And so, Heather, maybe you can first give us our legal disclaimer and then kind of dive into some of the things that we are allowed to do.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, first of all, I'm not an attorney. And again, Christian Educators is not a law firm, but we are knowledgeable and we have connections with people who know all the stuff.
Yes.
But I would say, I'm glad you brought that up because personally, the first 15 years of my career had no idea what I could or couldn't do. And quite honestly, I lived in a lot of fear and uncertainty, and I felt very disconnected from my faith when I was at school because I really didn't know what I could or couldn't do. So this is a really, really important topic. And once I learned these things, it opened up my mindset to be able to walk in confidence in certain situations. So yes, there are things that we can do. And I think also in our culture, we focus more on what we can't do, right? So the things we can do, bring a lot of hope and encouragement. And I think the one thing that I learned that just blew me away was that when students ask me a question about faith or my faith, I can answer that with confidence. I had many times where students would ask me, do you believe in Jesus? I was an elementary teacher. Do you go to church? Do you? And I kind of froze because I thought, I don't know if I can answer that question. So the opportunity to answer student questions really was exciting for me.
Yes. So making sure here, so we are allowed to answer age appropriate questions then, right? When students ask them to us. Real quick, before we dive into more of these, though, there's a big overall law about being able to talk about religion, but not proselytizing, right? Can you maybe explain that kind of overall rule?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you look at the First Amendment, it talks about the fact, well, in the First Amendment, it says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So in that First Amendment, as a government, we cannot establish a religion. And when educators are in a public school setting, they have their government hat on. And so they are not in their classrooms saying, okay, this is the religion that we practice here. I can't open the day with devotions and prayer. I cannot, get on that soapbox and declare give an altar call in my classroom, right? And that is for some people very frustrating because as a Christian, we might say, well, I really want to be able to be free to share all of those things. But the Establishment Clause really is a protection. So when you think about this, like in my classroom, if I'm a Christian and I want to start my class with devotionals, all right, well, then let's say my students go to the teacher next door. Well, they're a Muslim teacher. So now that teacher might say, okay, well, now we're going to face east and we're going to pray to Allah. And then the next classroom they go to, it might be somebody who practices witchcraft. And so they might say, okay, well, now we're going to learn about curses or, so you're right. We cannot establish a religion. Actually, as educators in public schools, we need to be neutral as far as religion goes. So we can't be hostile either, right? It's a neutral zone because in the rest of the First Amendment, there's the Establishment Clause, like we can't establish a religion, but we can't prohibit the free exercise thereof. And that's called the Free Exercise Clause. So we cannot prohibit our students from practicing their religion, talking about their religion, writing about their religion. We need to be neutral, but allow that freedom for our students. And as educators, we're also free to talk to our colleagues about our faith. We're free to, in sharing about ourselves, let our students know that we're a Christian. That's okay to let them know. It's okay to wear a cross necklace or right. We have some freedom in that too. So
Yeah, so that's so helpful to keep in mind as we go through some of these details and as you run
yeah,
across questions to think of both of those, right? So there's, once again, just kind of recapping, we are not allowed to establish a religion. So I know proselytizing is a big one. Like you're not allowed to try to convert
yeah,
someone. That's not considered legal. But at the same time, you're not allowed to prohibit it. So you're not allowed to prohibit students. And that means that also, like, you are allowed, you don't have to push down and say, like, I have no religion. You have to pretend that you
No,
don't believe
right.
either. So there's still freedom. Just can't
Yes.
go out and to say, establish this religion or try to proselytize or convince
Yes.
someone one way or the other.
Right.
So you've already mentioned we're allowed to answer questions. We're
Yep.
allowed to talk with colleagues, right? We're allowed to have,
Mhm.
we have a lot of freedom with colleagues, like pray, read the Bible. There's no restrictions there, right?
Right, right. Yeah, as a matter of fact, at my school, we had a prayer group that met every week. We just met before our duty hours. So you do have to be respectful. Like, if this is my duty hour, this is where I have my hat on, right? My government hat. I need to be focused on the job that they've given me to do. Um, but that doesn't mean that I also don't pray for my colleagues if they have a challenge coming up. But formal meetings outside of our contract day.
Right. So obviously you can't let, oh, I'm praying now, so I don't have to do my job. You have to do all of your duties.
Right.
But there's nothing keeping you from having those conversations or
Right.
like at the lunch or, or
Yes.
whatever. It's not at work hours. So
Yeah.
okay, what about teaching about religion? So let's say you're teaching history or culture or literature and a religious topic comes up. How can we and can't we talk about religion in those contexts?
Actually, in instruction, the Bible can be used as an instruction. There's a lot of history. There's poetry. You can use that in an instructional manner. You can have a Bible in your classroom library. It is literature, right? Um, the other amazing thing is there are things called primary sources. So you can bring historical documents. Every year there is the National Day of Prayer. That's in May, right? There's a presidential proclamation that is written every year for the National Day of Prayer. Now, you can use any of those sources as instructional tools. Martin Luther King Jr. So you can integrate those without repercussion.
Right. So you're allowed then, like you should understand, to teach about religion,
Yep.
bring up the Bible in a literary, historical, or even teaching this is what this religion teaches, but it has to
Yes.
be neutral, right? So you can't say this is
Yes.
what you must believe, but you can teach this is if it's appropriate for the curriculum. This is what this religion teaches, or this is what this religion teaches, or so really, depending on what you teach, there are so many ways you might get a little bit creative, and
Mhm.
consider how can I bring this in. And Heather, can you talk for a moment about though when we think as Christians, we know the word of God is powerful. We know it's what our students need, but that we're not allowed to proselytize. But can you speak to a moment of the value of just still bringing knowledge, even if we can't go all the way to the finish line and share the gospel or have an altar call, like you said?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Um, One way is through Proverbs. Um, the Proverbs has so much good wisdom. So, for example, you could use like a quote of the week, right? And you can incorporate an ancient proverb into that quote, and you can talk about that, right? Um, the fruit of the Spirit. Against these, there is no law. You teaching about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self control. Nobody would argue against those things. And so, incorporating some proverbs, incorporating the fruit of the Spirit, um, you can pull that in quite naturally.
Yeah. And the powerful thing about that is, right, we sometimes do think, well, if I'm not actually able to give the gospel, like what good does it do? But God can use those seeds, right? We might just be one step all along the way, and God might be using these seeds. They might come back later. So I think, think of that sower sowing the seed. I don't think we should ever feel like, oh, it's not enough, because God can use all of that.
Well, and also there's great literature, right, that leads towards kingdom conversations that if it's not me bringing it up, the students will. No.
Okay, so if I bring up a piece of literature, that's a great, we're reading this piece of literature, and I'm not, but the students ask the questions and the students are discussing, the students are. So talk for us a minute though about that, because I do think sometimes there is this misunderstanding that, if students bring up a religious topic, we almost have to like, okay, we have to step
Mhm.
away from this, or like, oh, they can't do a report on that, or whatever the case is. So can you speak to a moment, first of all, of the teacher's responsibilities in this way, and then maybe how we can be creative and where we give our students opportunities for them to share.
Absolutely. So, for example, there are many books that have religious themes to them, right? So, for example, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. That was a book that I shared every year with my students. And eventually, as you're talking about the characters, like for example, Aslan, when Aslan comes up, I'll just ask questions about Aslan. Oh, so what type of character is he? Does he remind you of anyone? And typically, one of the students will say, oh, it's Jesus. And then all I just say is, really? Why do you think that?
Mm.
And I just ask questions and I create space for students to have conversations. So I think it's really when those themes come up, it's asking questions and then giving kids the freedom to share because they have complete freedom. And that opens up the doors to so many great conversations that I'm a facilitator of those conversations. I don't lead them. I don't, if kids ask what I believe, I can tell them. But otherwise, I kind of set the stage for the students to be the ones sharing.
Yeah, and that's just a really powerful, maybe different way than people have thought about it, but that's really powerful. And it's important too, right, as educators that we create a classroom where students feel they have freedom, because that is their freedom. And
Yes.
there is, we actually would be wrong to stifle or to say you can't talk about that, or no, we can't, we have to move on from that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's really, really powerful. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. Did you know that the Teach for the Heart podcast is part of the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network? The Herzog Foundation Podcast Network is a hub for thought provoking discussions, insightful narratives, and inspiring content around education from a Christian perspective. So if you enjoy this podcast, we encourage you to check out all of the Herzog Foundation podcasts at herzogfoundation.com/podcasts. One in particular that you might enjoy is the School Success Podcast, where school leaders share their stories of successes and failures to inspire and motivate us. Find this podcast and more at herzogfoundation.com/podcasts. Now, back to our program. Now, what about things like there's all kinds of opportunities with like student led clubs or student led religious activities. So, what about if students, it's a student led thing, a religious activity? How can a teacher be involved or not be involved in something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I think what I would love for everybody to understand is something called the Equal Access Act. The equal access means that faith-based clubs have equal access to everything that secular clubs would have. All right. So if you at your school have a variety of clubs and your students are starting a Christian club, they should have equal access to making announcements, hanging up posters in school, promoting their activities, all of that. And so let's say that you are an advisor of a school, an official school club that is Christian. You are custodial in that manner. So that means that you are a supervisor. You're sitting in the corner of the room. You're making sure nobody's bleeding, right? Everybody leaves in one piece. But the students are the ones leading it. Now, of course, I have a great example of a teacher who told the students that your questions unlock my lips. If you ask me a question, I can answer. Otherwise, I'm going to just sit here and you guys lead it.
Mm.
And it has provided some really sweet opportunities for her because they know that, well, if I ask the teacher this question, she can help, right?
Mm.
Um, Now, there are also community groups, right? So if it is a club that takes place outside of school hours, like the Good News Club, which is something that's common at the elementary level, or sometimes FCA is like a before or after school type club, then you're a community member. You can then have complete freedom to share the gospel, speak to things. Um, it's just when it's an official school club, it's a little bit different.
Okay, so not diving too much into the legalities, but just trying to understand this. So if it's an official school club, the
Yeah.
students are leading it, they have freedom, you're
Yeah.
there as an advisor,
Hmm.
you're not leading it, but you can obviously answer questions.
Right.
Contrast that though, if it's a community group coming in, yeah,
Yes.
like you said, Good News, like before or after club, a release program, or I don't know, I won't get into all legalities, but or yeah, Federation of Christian Athletes. So if you are a volunteer with them, you can come back into the same school that you teach at because your teacher hat is off and your volunteer hat is on. And now it's like a totally different story and you can share freely because this is a
Yes.
community event, not an official school event. Am I understanding the basics of that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Because it's outside of your contract hour and it's not
Mm,
an official club. Yeah.
gotcha. Okay. So
Hmm.
that might be something to consider or look into, which is super
Yeah.
exciting.
Can I
That's
just
very
share?
cool.
I have to share an amazing, literally
Please.
just happened a week ago. In this official school club hat, we had the educator. She's also the one who says, if you ask me a question, that unlocks my lips, right? But she had a situation come up where at her high school, there were all sorts of posters hung about Ramadan in the halls, explaining what it is, kind of celebrations for the Ramadan season.
Mhm.
Well, the Christian club said, "Oh gosh, we would really love to be able to put some things up around Holy Week, around Easter, um, kind of acknowledging that holiday." So they went to their principal and they said, "Hey, we'd like to put up these posters." And the principal refused to let them do it. They
Hmm.
said, "No, this is, um, we're not going to put that up. This is, I don't know, remember their description why, but they refused them that right." So now we have the advisor of the club who knows the freedoms that students have, who knows about the equal access. And she is able to get some legal counsel regarding this. And she's able to equip her students with the things that they need to present to their principal, why they should legally be able to put up their information. So it was a beautiful story of these students being equipped by their teacher, the teacher being able to coach them and say, here's how we handle this respectfully as an ambassador, share the story. And they did this. These students went, they were able to present. They had legal counsel on how to do this. And they were able to put up a whole display in the cafeteria about Easter and what
Oh,
that's all about.
that's so cool. I love
Hmm.
that. And that's really amazing example. And I also love because I'm guessing Christian Educators was involved in helping with that. So those of you that aren't familiar, like I said, Christian Educators, if you're a member there, they have so many things. They have kind of all that liability insurance that you need, but they
Yeah.
also have counselors so
Yes.
and legal advice. So when you run into a situation, you're like, I don't know what to do about it. You can
Yeah.
call them up and they can coach you through it and how to
Yeah.
handle it well, which is really key, right? Because we can often handle things not well. We don't know what to
Yeah.
do. So having that advice is just so valuable. That's amazing. That's what a cool thing to be able to put up a display around Easter.
Yes.
That's
In a
so
public
neat.
high school.
That is awesome. I love
Hmm.
that. So there's so much more we could talk to. I have one more question and then kind of open it up to anything else you wanted to share. But what about, you mentioned this briefly, but we get a lot of questions around, am I allowed to wear a cross? Am I allowed to have a Bible on my desk?
Right.
What are the laws around those types of things?
Well, first of all, there was a Supreme Court case recently. I don't know if you remember the Coach Kennedy case, but he was told that he could not pray at a football game. And
Yes.
it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he actually won. And basically, what they were saying is we are free to be who we are, right? We have freedoms. Now, we have to be really careful about those. So, for example, like a "See You at the Pole" event, we are not we are not to pray with students, but we can be present,
Hmm.
right? But we also can be who we can acknowledge our beliefs as well. So, yes, you can have a cross necklace. You can, when you are introducing yourself, let's say at the beginning of the year, everybody shares 5 things about themselves. I can say, oh, I'm a Christian or I'm a follower of Jesus in that description. If we are having snack in our classroom, I could silently just bow my head and say a prayer over it in the presence of my students. I'm not saying anything to them. I'm just revealing who I am um, in a non threatening way. So we can do that. When it comes to a Bible on your desk, one of the things that's really helpful is to know what your district policy is around your desk. If your
Hmm.
desk is designated your personal space, you can put anything on your desk that you want to. So you could have verses on your desk. You could put a Bible there. And oftentimes that leads to questions from your students, right? We want our students to ask us questions. So they might ask what that book is, right? And you could share what it was or answer questions about it. But that's really part of our responsibility, is to know what is my district policy around that.
Right, because
Um,
if the desk were like an official like district, we don't want personal expressions on there, then you're just complying with the policy. It's not a particular
right,
religious or non-religious thing then.
right. Now, here's what you can run into though. Um, there are many, many, many people who don't actually know the law. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of our administrators don't know. And there's a whole religion policy in the Department of Education that will blow your mind as far as the freedoms that you have, what is allowed. But let's say that your principal doesn't know about that, and they see that Bible on your desk and they say, I need you to put that Bible away. All right. So you have a choice at that point. Um, you could. Some people get really mad and they might stomp their foot and refuse to do it because they know that they have the legal freedom to do so. But what we don't have freedom to do is be insubordinate.
Mm.
Okay. So insubordination is, you can be fired for insubordination. So what we just tell teachers is, if your principal comes and tells you to put your Bible away, do it. And then, call an organization like Christian Educators, let them know what's going on. We can give you resources, because you can have the opportunity to share with your principal, like, hey, come back later for a conversation and say, I'm not sure if you realize this, but here's this policy and this is what this means. And I would like to be able to do that. It's respectful. It's giving them the benefit of the doubt that they just don't know. And it's more of a bridge builder than, being defiant.
Yes. Oh, and that's such a helpful way. That's such a helpful thing to keep in mind, right? And that idea of like, yes, I did what you asked, I put it away, and now we're circling back and having this conversation, the opportunities that could then unfold and
Yeah.
how that could affect future conversations that,
Yeah.
happen also with other teachers. So yeah, that's such great wisdom in how to handle that. Well, this has been
And
so helpful, Heather.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. What else can you share with us here before we
I,
wrap up?
I'll share one more story. And I think it is also your colleagues don't always know either, right? What the law is.
That's true.
And so there was an example of a teacher who told a student everybody could bring their favorite book, right? Their favorite book to class. And the book was by Francis Chan about Jesus. And the teacher told the student, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't read your book because we can't read about Jesus in school." And so this
Hmm.
little second grader went home feeling very dejected and told their parents. Well, their parents are teachers and they know the law. And so they were able to speak on behalf of their child and share with that teacher what was allowed to. And that teacher was grateful. She didn't know. And so he was given the opportunity to read his book. And of course, the students knew that it was rejected before. Now they were very excited to hear, and he was able to read. So we need to be that voice of giving people the benefit of the doubt, and also just giving your colleagues information, giving your administrators information to protect those freedoms so we can walk in those.
Yeah, and that's so helpful to remember too that I think sometimes when this happens, we can almost have this idea of they're being antagonistic, but a lot of times they might be afraid, right? They might just be like,
Yes.
I don't want to get in trouble. I'm going to get
Yeah.
in trouble if I allow this because that is just the social narrative is not
Yeah.
accurate in a lot of these
Right.
cases. So that's super helpful to keep in mind, just kind of expecting sometimes that pushback, not getting upset by it.
Yeah.
And just but also not being intimidated by it either and
Right.
willing to go ahead and just have those polite but tricky but polite conversations. That's really helpful.
Yes.
And Christian educators can absolutely help out with that.
We love doing
So
that.
yeah. So we're going to link to quite a few resources here on the page. So if you go to teachfortheheart.com/345, we're going to link to Christian Educators website if you want to find out more about them. We're also going to link to a little just pamphlet that they've put together that kind of lists out the do's and the don'ts in a little succinct form that you can kind of use for reference. That's really, really helpful. So we'll link to all that at teachfortheheart.com/345. Any final words of encouragement for us, Heather?
No, I would say you are in your schools for such a time as this, and there's great opportunity. I hope you're encouraged. Be prayerful, learn, and be open to having conversations and representing Christ well in these situations. Right? They're all opportunities.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope that this has been helpful. If it has, please do share it with a colleague, a friend. Go once again, teachfortheheart.com/345. You can share it there, whatever format is easiest for you. Well, this episode has been brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. All views and opinions are our own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. Thank you so much. We look forward to being with you again soon. In the meantime, teacher, remember, God is at work in you and through you, and He's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on Him and teach for the heart.